Greetings, this is Joe Gilmore. It's Sunday, November 21st, 2021, and welcome to the video version of my blog, Gleaming the Cube, which can be found at batshitcave.blogspot.com if you'd like to read it. I'm not going to sit here and just read the blog front to back. I'm going to refer to it, but I'm using it more just as a visual aid. I'm going to provide a lot of information that's not in that written blog, and there's some information in the written blog that I'm not necessarily going to talk about here. So they're meant to complement each other more than anything. And if you're a fan of Soundgarden, I know a lot of people who follow my blog are Soundgarden fans. I am sort of building off of the idea that I touched on in a previous blog where we talked about the first Soundgarden album, some of the symbolism and themes surrounding it, and the fact that Greg Ginn's SST label released it back in, I think it was 1988. SST was originally solid-state transmitters or solid-state tuners, which I guess Greg Ginn operated starting when he was like 12 years old or something. And it morphed into SST Records, who put out a lot of punk stuff and alternative and kind of laid the groundwork for what would later become the alternative and grunge movements, especially considering he had Soundgarden and, Sonic Youth and Minutemen and all kinds of influential acts, underground acts. So, and Black Flag was kind of integral to that whole, it was all kind of the same thing. It was kind of like the same movement. You find a lot of the same people. I mean, Mike Watt of the Minutemen worked at SST. Greg Ginn and Chuck Dukowski, the bass player for Black Flag, also worked at SST. So it's almost like this guild, or I don't want to use the word cult, but fraternal order of punk rockers, pushing this movement forward that Black Flag sort of symbolized. And Greg Ginn's brother, Raymond Ginn, who changed his name to Raymond Pettibone, he was responsible for all the artwork. And he came up with the name and the logo. According to Keith Morris, the original Black Flag singer, as quoted in Mocha TV on YouTube, if you look it up, he said, and all of a sudden somebody else steps up. And that person stepping up would be Raymond Pettibone, presenting the logo and the name. So it's kind of interesting. I'm trying to picture that. The band sitting around going, oh, we should be this, we should be that. And Raymond just walks in and goes, oh, here's the logo, and you should call the name Black Flag. So, like I said, we're building off of some of the themes I touched on in a previous blog where we talked about the fact that SST released Soundgarden's first album on October 31st, Halloween. And spooky date, right? Well, looking at symbolism and exploring what it could mean and what the artist's intent or the person's intent who chose the date or the symbol or the name, that's kind of what I do. So that's what we're going to do here. I use it as an excuse to look a little bit more into SST and this Black Flag thing and what is all this symbolism. So that's kind of what we're going to get into here. Now, I used to see this logo around a lot before I was a fan of punk rock and before I even really knew what it was. And you'd see it everywhere. I don't know how common it is now, but I know that it's probably one of the most tattooed images out there, or at least was up until a few years ago, the 4 bars. And that's what the guy who invented the logo called it. He said it's a flag, but it's 4 bars. It does suggest waving, like in the wind, or like pistons going, or So he's talking about the way it looks, but he's not talking about the theme of it, which is Black Flag. What is a black flag? Well, obviously it's a flag that's black, but if you watch the film Decline of the Western Civilization, which is a very famous, really awesome film that everyone should see who's into rock and roll, it's a snapshot of what was going on in the punk scene in Southern California, Los Angeles in the early 80s. And the director, Penelope Spheris, who did a metal version right after this, which was also a great film, she asks Greg Ginn at this place called The Church where they hung out and practiced down in Hermosa Beach. She asked him, what does Black Flag mean, the words Black Flag? And he said, it means anarchy. And this is corroborated if you go to anarchism.net. Anarchists have used the black flag as a symbol at least since the early 1880s. It's also associated with pirates. So very cool, extreme, anti-authoritarian kind of idea behind the band from the get-go, which is perfect, right? Because, we're talking about the Black Flag is considered kind of the pioneers of hardcore punk rock, which is kind of like where punk rock took an extra step away beyond Ramones and even Sex Pistols and got more extreme. You got Henry Rollins with his, flexing his muscles and, this kind of violent, forceful, slam dance culture that sort of began from there. But also kind of an intellectual, what's going on in the world? I'm angry, but what do I do about it kind of thing going on. And a lot of that was influenced by the concepts introduced by Raymond Pettibone in the artwork, because he did a lot of their flyers as well. So he was kind of like this weird intellectual guide, symbolic guide. He's very influential on the band. It's just, it's interesting when you step back and you look at what went into Black Flag and how influential they were. It's pretty profound. You think about all the bands that, SST put out. It just gets, you can't understate the influence, really. So Raymond Pettibone, whose original given name was Raymond Ginn, kind of interesting that, Ray Ginn, Ronald Reagan, sounds kind of like Ronald Reagan, right, who was the president around the time that, Black Flag was performing their quote-unquote anarchist-inspired shows. So it's supposed to represent a flag waving in the wind, which suggests depth, because a flag waving in the wind, a flag is a rectangle. But if it's waving in the wind, the width shortens, so it starts becoming almost like in a 2D dimension, kind of like a square. But you've got the 3D because you've got the idea of, this part bending in, that part bending out. So that got me thinking, what does this logo represent? Something else maybe? Is there something else hiding in there? And Raymond Pettibone, in the quote earlier, is even encouraging us to, look at, he suggested maybe it's 4 pistons. I suggested, maybe it's 4 lines on a wall, counting the days till I get out of jail, right? 4 pillars supporting a structure. That's interesting. So what I did is I drew some lines, some straight lines, and I found that this thing's more precise than it looks. These are straight lines. These are right angles, and I found a cube buried in there. If you connect these coordinate points on the outside, you get a 3D cube. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points. Talked about this a lot in other blogs. I don't want to digress too much, but this is a highly loaded symbol, the black cube. And I call it a black cube because the name of the band is Black Flag. So we've got the idea of black being introduced, and we've got the cube kind of suggested within the geometry, or I guess, the mathematics of the symbol itself. You could connect other lines in here and probably get other things, but I'm seeing a cube, and I find that very interesting. And you've got the black cube at Mecca. You've got the black cube and the Star of David. You've got the tefillin from the Ashkenazi Jewish rituals. You've got the cross if you fold out a box. And you've got the hexagon at the North Pole of Saturn and the whole Saturn connection. It's very loaded. But there's also a very strong Masonic connection. And from the MasonicTrowel.com, we find that the black cube is a giant's strength to protect Freemasonry. Used thoughtlessly, carelessly, without Masonic reason, it crushes not only him at whom it is aimed, but also him who casts it. So let me explain what they mean by that. And I'm not a Freemason. Maybe it means a lot of things that I don't know. But I know that there is a process by which Freemasons cast their vote to decide whether they want to accept a candidate or reject that candidate to their fraternal order. And when they want to reject someone, they will submit a black cube, and the black cube represents their rejection of that individual. So it's interesting to consider that idea and then consider the whole punk rock thing and what they were doing, and the whole anarchist angle and the rejection of authority. It's kind of interesting to try and tie it together and figure out how that might make sense. Now, maybe this cube isn't there intentionally, but Raymond Pettibone, he did suggest that it may mean more than one thing, and he seemed to, like the idea that people, and even encourage people to look into more than one meaning. So I'm taking him up on it. So maybe there's a black cube in here. I mean, there is a black cube in there, and maybe it's intentional and maybe it isn't. And the word black is there, so that's why I'm calling it a black cube. I mean, it's not a flag, but we're supposed to think it's a flag, right? I mean, look at it. It's 4 bars. It is not a flag. It's supposed to represent a flag. So I'm operating on that same logic, and I'm saying, well, I see a black cube. Now, if you're a Black Flag fan, you've no doubt heard the stories that are the stuff of American hardcore punk rock legend now, the riots and the police activity at the early Black Flag shows. Chuck Dukowski does an interview where I think it's from like 1980, 81 from television, from CBS or something like that. And they're talking about punk rock and what's it all about? And what is all the violence? And Chuck Dukowski sort of paints this picture of the cops barging in and just bashing heads for no apparent reason, which may very well be true. I wasn't there. I don't know. What was Black Flag doing? I mean, were they provoking this type of reaction? There's actually an interesting interview on YouTube here. This is it right here, and this show blaring out. And the interviewer actually puts a pretty good question at Greg Ginn, something I would ask him right along these lines, and just listen to what he says here.
To me. Yeah, well, it just seemed like the whole Black Flag package was always like, extreme music, extreme art, an extreme message. I mean, do you think that's wrong?
I don't know. I don't think of it in that kind of way as being extreme. I think of it more I don't think of it in extreme as trying to outrage people. I just think of it as songs that, are about things. And so I don't think of it in that way. I think we were trying to go for extremes is going for as high energy as possible in the extremes and in the energy and what we'd put into the performance. And in that way, I think the effort was always try to make it as extreme as possible that way, but not to outrage people or elicit just a reaction for the sake of reaction.
Okay, so notice how uncomfortable Greg Ginn got answering that question. He really doesn't like the idea that Black Flag was really extreme and trying to provoke a reaction. I've seen a video, I'm sure most Black Flag fans have seen it, of Henry Rollins standing on stage, and he's messing with this guy in the crowd, in the audience. And the guy's kind of heckling him, and he's heckling him back. And then all of a sudden, Henry just starts punching him right in the face. Standing on stage, and he squats down and, like He-Man, starts punching the guy in the face. All right? And there's another interview. It's terrible. It's this kid interviewing the band, and Rollins just sort of goes up to the kid and starts bullying him, trying to bully him for 15 minutes straight. It's a very interesting interview, which Henry himself is, I guess, apparently ashamed of when he's asked about it these days. But the point being that it's kind of absurd what Greg Ginn is saying here. I mean, with flyers like this that they were posting up all over the place, I mean, they weren't trying to get a reaction for the sake of I mean, the cops were all over them. According to Rollins and others, they were staking out in front of SST records. And I know what most people believe about that, and I know what we're supposed to believe about that. But I begin to wonder: were they? Was this really the cops against Black Flag, or was this some type of intelligence operation where the Black Flag guys were going to play the rebels, the rioters, the instigators, leading leading the youth into extremism, so that the cops could then crash down on them? Was this just like some type of intelligence operation where the blood was real? I just it makes me wonder. There's two ways to look at it. While I was researching the first few results on YouTube, I was basically looking for interviews with Raymond Pettibone, and this Museum of Contemporary Art comes up a lot. They seem to be a well-funded organization, and they are very much behind Raymond Pettibone and have these high-budget featurettes on him. And I couldn't help but notice that their logo has this cube in it, and in fact, this introductory segment here, if you want to go look at it, it starts with a close-up on that cube. And there's a pyramid in there as well, so it's kind of interesting symbology, consider what we've been talking about. There was another one too, from a different page. This was actually, some guy was, I guess, attended Pettibone's opening in or exhibit in New York in 2017 from BrandonFriels.com. And again, this isn't something I had to dig, and let me find a cube here. This came right up. This was a high on the Google results, or maybe it was DuckDuckGo, but it came up pretty quick. And look, there's a black cube right there. I don't know why it's there, but there it is. Pettibone's name and a black cube. So this guy was talking about the art that he saw. Che Guevara. Che Guevara was a prominent communist figure in the Cuban Revolution who went on to become a guerrilla leader in South America. The reviewer said, a portrait of Joseph Stalin cleverly read, "I should be president of the United States." Another, this time of Che Guevara, was headlined, "At least I still got my own good looks." So I don't want to spend too much time reading into this because, he does a lot of artwork. Okay, so I don't know how much of it focuses on these political figures, but I do see a little bit of a thread from the anarchist theme of the Black Flag logo and name, because the thing is, and he's not exact. It doesn't sound like he's mocking these communist revolutionary figures. It sounds like he's kind of, I'm not a good interpreter of art, so maybe the people listening to this know better than I, but it doesn't sound like he's being critical of these individuals. I should be the president of the United States, even if sarcastic, is kind of, I don't know what to make of that. The United States should be communist? Is that what he's saying? I don't know. But the path to revolution is definitely anarchy, because you have to tear down the current governmental structure before you can introduce whatever you want to introduce. Socialism, communism, fascism, Nazism, whatever it is. So you need to get the masses all behind your cause, and propaganda is the number one way that occurs. I'm sure Raymond Pettibone is very aware of that, as well as Chuck Dukowski would have been, the bass player for Black Flag. He was college educated before he was even in Black Flag. He studied, psychobiology or something like that. It's something about studying the brain and human behavior. So, you have these minds behind the group Black Flag early on that seem to be cut out for, propagandizing a certain section of society for a specific purpose. I'm not saying that's what was happening, but I'm saying the ingredients were definitely there. This kind of bleeds a little bit into the Bathory and the Scandinavian Metal Attack series that I did, where I know not everyone was as interested in part 3 as they were in part 1 and 2. In part 1 and 2, I just sort of, I get into the whole Lords of Chaos thing and the burning churches and all that. But in part 3, I get a little more into the radicalizing of youths. And I know that your typical Bathory fan or your typical Black Flag fan probably doesn't care about stuff like that. But I think you should, because I think some of you extremists out there who dream of living in this pagan Mad Max sort of apocalyptic future, I think a lot of people who fantasize about things like this, they don't think far ahead enough. Especially when you're a youth, when you're young, it's easy to get mesmerized by the idea of overthrowing, an oppressive, governmental structure, or, just, fight the power, whatever. Insert your catchphrase in there somewhere. Rebellion. Rebellion is hot. When you're young, it's exciting. But if you don't know what you're going to do, what you're going to rebuild your society with after you destroy it, if you don't really know, you don't have a very clear plan, someone else does. And they probably don't have your best interests in mind. You may not be the guy with the cool mohawk who's kicking everyone's ass. You may be more likely you'll be one of the starving people dressed in rags. The third world, Mad Max future, is all fine and dandy if you're the fascist in charge of it, or if you're, the road warrior, but everyone else is going to suffer. Now, I didn't know going into researching this blog that Raymond Pettibone was so prolific, and SST as well. Here's a zine he did. I guess he did a bunch of these. This was A New Wave of Violence, and SST actually put these out. So, it wasn't just a record label. They were putting out this stuff, and I just find it, again, very ironic that, Greg Ginn would say in an interview, well, we weren't trying to get a reaction. I mean, we were high energy, but we weren't trying to provoke any kind of reaction. Well, at the same time, he's putting out these zines by his brother that says A New Wave of Violence, and it's just got this real violent, this guy just murdered someone, he's reading about true crime. I mean, I remember seeing a lot of this art when I was younger, and I liked it. I thought I'm a fan of comics to a degree. I mean, you can see my avatar. It's, martial law. So, I mean, I don't dislike comics or even these types of comics, but, as I've gotten older and I look back, I see it differently than I used to. I guess that's what happens when you get older, right? But I just think it's interesting that Greg Ginn's kind of like, well, what? Why are they coming after me? Well, maybe because you're putting out this stuff that's like a new wave of violence, and someone getting the wrong idea might think you're trying to promote violence. And, you might say, well, those people are stupid. Who cares what they think? Well, if you're going to express something, you have to be willing to accept the consequences of that expression. And part of the consequences might be that people are going to respond in a way that is adversary, adverse to you, and you have to accept that. Here's some other things I found. I found a website that has a really cool archive of a bunch of Raymond Pettibone stuff, hundreds of examples. This one has an owl, kind of interesting. He'll be quite satisfied after he has looked around a bit. Coming from an occult kind of, Bohemian Grove, illuminous, Freemasonic point of view, the owls see in the dark, and that's why the owl symbol is used sometimes associated with secret societies, because they're thought of as being wise or illuminated or smart because they see in the dark. So it's just kind of interesting symbolism there. The one eye symbol, inside a circle, inside a square. 2 nights in the nunnery. Oh, Sade spent 2 nights in the nunnery. I just thought that was kind of interesting. Another eye, and it says eye. Veil its fierceness with grace, temper its violence, pour a human enchantment into that basin. With the eye there. Saccharine Trust, I guess, album cover. It's got the serpent on the cross. Other bands have used the symbol. It's one of those things that when you're in a band and you look, oh wow, that looks cool, let's use that. But kind of interesting. We talked about this symbol in the video and blog I did about serpent symbolism, and the seal of Count Cagliostro, and how this that's one of the places this originally came from. Occult symbolism is what we're talking about here. And hey, there's the cube again, with this this quote from Jim Morrison. It's actually one of my favorite quotes from Jim Morrison. And here's the cover for Nervous Breakdown, also by Raymond Pettibone. And what you see here is, it looks like it's in a classroom, right? Is this a teacher fighting with a student? The artwork's kind of primitive, but this guy's balding on the top, so obviously he's, older. And this looks like a kid who's maybe ready to fight. So this is interesting because, Raymond Pettibone and Greg Ginn's father was actually a teacher for 30 years. It's really kind of amazing how much influence and how prolific these two brothers are, these Ginn brothers. Here's Greg Ginn right here with Black Flag, and here's his brother Raymond. And so I got to wondering, like, who are these? Who are the parents of these two guys? It's got to be someone kind of interesting, and it's actually a guy named Regis C.K. Ginn, and he is a very interesting guy. We're told that he was in World War II, actually. He was a navigator, which I guess that's the guy in the back of the plane that, plots the course. Sounds like a pretty technical job. You'd have to be kind of know what's going on with the computers and such, whatever they had going at the time. But at this site, goodreads.com, there's a brief biography. Regis C.K. Ginn was the author of a textbook, integrated writing, and 2 novels, Tiger, Tiger, and The Cold Warrior. After a career in the U.S. Air Force, he became a teacher in Hermosa Beach, California. He is the father of musician Greg Ginn and artist Raymond Pettibone. So as I said, he was a teacher. We're told he was a teacher for something like 30 years. So teachers are kind of, authority figures, parental figures, talking about anarchy and, Henry Rollins, I believe, came from a military background, had a kind of a military upbringing. So it's just interesting how we find these individuals who are, against authority or seem to be against authority, and yet they come from these places where, with parents that are, from the military, holding, in some cases, high ranks. Jim Morrison's father as well, Admiral Morrison, was involved in the Gulf of Tonkin incident. So it's just the irony between who these people are and who their parents are, and what does it all mean. Now, I haven't read his books, Regis Ginn, but I looked at a brief synopsis or, of the plot, and I can't remember if it was The Cold Warrior or Tiger, Tiger, but I think it was Tiger, Tiger was like a spy book, kind of James Bond kind of stuff, double agents and things like that. So I just find it interesting that that's what he was into. And we get into the topic of, who are these musicians? Who do they really represent? Are they really what we think they are in front, or do they represent something else? That's kind of where my mind is at. So I just find it very fascinating that, the Ginn father was sort of into that stuff. Now, supposedly, SST started out working with some kind of like World War II surplus equipment, and was converting that to their, their transmitters or whatever these are here that they made. Now, Greg Ginn was like 12 years old when he started this business, and I just find this all kind of like, is this real or is this like some made-up story? I mean, maybe it's true. Maybe he was just like a genius prodigy, and having a father like that with equipment laying around like that would be very conducive to that type of influence and getting started so early in electronics. But I probably wouldn't have used the name SST. I think it stands for solid state transmitters or solid state tuners. it's just kind of odd that they would be putting SS in the name, using equipment that came from World War II, which maybe belonged to the SS formerly. I don't know. I found that kind of odd. But this whole history of, Greg Ginn, his career as a young entrepreneur in the electrical, transmitter market there with his magazine, a very fascinating story. But getting back to Raymond Pettibone, where did he get his one person on a podcast I saw was of the belief that Raymond Pettibone was a graphophile, someone who just draws all the time, almost compulsively. And I would say that suits his personality. He kind of comes off as maybe like he might be autistic or something. I don't believe that he is, but he comes off very aloof and eccentric, as does Greg Ginn, actually, in interviews. But Regis Ginn, the father, he was an artist himself. And look at this painting here. It says on this website, boo hooray, it's worth $1 million. So I don't know if that's accurate, but I mean, I think it's significant to note that, that he was an artist. I don't remember what I was reading. I was researching SST or Sub Pop or something like that, and I came across a couple rumors about Mike Watt of the Minutemen. And I don't know if they're true or not, but basically they were saying that they thought he was a Freemason. And I never listened to the Minutemen much. I did read about them in, I think, This Band Could Be Your Life or some book like that. It was very touching, very cool little read there. So that's when I kind of fell in love with the story of punk rock, because I can't say I ever really fell that in love with the music. Although I do like a lot of punk rock, I like the idea of punk rock more than I like the music itself most of the time. But anyhow, the Minutemen were on SST Records, and Mike Watt actually worked at SST apparently for a period of time until D. Boone died, tragically. The other guy, the main guy in Minutemen. I just thought it was interesting to read what the Minutemen are when you look them up as far as the definition. Where does it come from? Minutemen were civilian colonists who independently formed militia companies, self-trained in weaponry, tactics, and military strategies, comprising the American colonial partisan militia during the American Revolutionary War. They were known for being ready at a minute's notice, hence the name. Minutemen provided a highly mobile, rapidly deployed force that enabled the colonies to respond immediately to war threats. Just thought that was kind of interesting considering everything we've been talking about. Anyhow, I stumbled across this Twitter tweet from back in 2015. Now, this is from @Watt from Pedro, because I guess he's from San Pedro. And then we've got a reply from Raymond Pettibone. So these two accounts still exist. Last I checked a couple days ago, and they both still have the same picture that you see here. And in fact, Mike Watts has like a blue check mark next to it now. So that basically means that Twitter is saying, yes, this is the real person. It's not an impersonator. I don't think Raymond Pettibone's has a check mark. But anyway, I'm just going to read what it says. Mike Watt, it looks like what he said was, I'm multidisciplinary artist. The one thing that stitches it all together is the Illuminati and Machiavelli. Raymond Pettibone got me woke. So he sounds like he just responded to Raymond. I don't know what the context is. There might be some joke happening here, but just look at what he just said. He's basically saying the Illuminati is what ties all my work together, and Machiavelli. So, and then he's using this weird grammar where he's got like, if you look at your keyboard and you look at the letter T, you'll see Y is right next to it. So, is he typing too fast and just messing up? And then he misses an A here. the one thing that stitches, he's missing an A, right? And he doesn't say and Machiavelli, he says and Machiavelli, and then he's got this weird apostrophe. So it's like he's writing in some weird code almost. And what's kind of creepy is, well, let me just read what Raymond Pettibone says in return, or appears to say. At Watt from Pedro and the Knights Templar, Watts shaken many hands, but the Freemason ones are the ones that truly matter. And he does the same thing. He like omits a letter here and there. Look, you got THT here without the A. It says that, and Raymond appears to do the same thing here. So and they got the same bite. B-U-Y-T, the Y before the T, which Mike Watt does. It almost makes it seem like the same person is typing both. So this is just thoroughly weird. Like, I don't, maybe I'm just supposed to laugh and go and not think about it too much, but it's too weird not to think about. And it's too consistent because the Illuminati, the Knights Templar, Machiavelli, it all fits together. Now, Machiavelli looks to me like a misspelling of Machiavelli, which, if you've ever watched Game of Thrones, or most people, a lot of people have heard about Machiavelli. He claimed that his experience and reading of history showed him that politics have always been played with deception, treachery, and crime. He also notably said that a ruler who is establishing a kingdom or republic and is criticized for his deeds, including violence, should be excused when the intention and the result is beneficial. Machiavelli's Prince has had a mixed reaction. Some considered it a straightforward description of the evil means used by bad rulers. Others read it in evil recommendations to tyrants to help them maintain their power. Even into recent times, some scholars, such as Leo Strauss, have stated that the opinion that Machiavelli was a teacher of evil should be taken seriously. So if you think of like Littlefinger from Game of Thrones, or the way he would work in secret, and he would be plotting, and he would be pitting people against each other and manipulating them. Basically, if you have no morals and you're in a position of influence, you can really screw people over, and you can get very powerful. But the key is you have to abandon morality. You have to have no morals. So this is something that, it's probably still going on today. And the more you look into this and you look at what's going on in the world and what is all this evil in the world, I mean, it explains it all really well. As I've said in some other, blogs and videos, the rules of consciousness, they don't necessarily change. I mean, our everyday thoughts change, the way we think changes, but the actual rules, the constructs of consciousness and nature and our bodies, those don't change. And the danger is, if we don't believe in that, but people who lack morals do believe in it, they're going to use it against us, and they're just going to have their way with us. And that's more or less, I think, what's happening in society. But Mike Watt didn't say Machiavelli. He said Machiavelli. And that was the name of Tupac Shakur's last album, Machiavelli, the Don Killuminati, the 7-Day Theory. This is something I want to look into someday. It's come up in other blogs I've done. But I don't really get into the whole Tupac and that whole conspiracy because, while I know there's something there, that is something that is covered a lot already by other people. Tupac Amaru Shakur, born Lizaine Parish Crooks, better known by his stage name Tupac and later by his alias Machiavelli. These are the last songs Shakur recorded before he was shot in September 7th, 1996. So again, Raymond Pettibone's response talks of the Knights Templar. There's probably several fraternal orders out there that have a grade of that. The Knights Templars were basically, the military wing of the Catholic Church And then they got too powerful because they were basically the first bankers. They helped people. Basically, people would give them their money and they would put it in a safe in one country or one area, and then they would give people a receipt. And then those people would get on their horse and go across the country. And if they got robbed, they had no money on them. They just had the receipt, and the receipt was worthless to them. So then they would get to wherever they were going, and then there would be another Knights Templar facility or bank, and they would give them the receipt, and then they would give them their money and then they started charging interest, and then they started issuing more receipts than they had actual, gold in their reserves, because they found that people usually don't ask for all the reserves all at once. So they always had a certain number of reserves. They could issue more receipts on what they had. So this gets into fractional reserve banking and the con that we live in today, where they just said, oh, screw the gold completely. Let's just pretend the receipts have value. And now you get into your, the Fed printing money endlessly and just, screwing the whole economy up. But anyhow, these Knights Templars were burned at the stake by Pope Clement, I think it was, on Friday the 13th. And they got burned alive. And Jacques de Lamay, the king of the French Templars at the time, or the head, called out from the flames a curse to the Pope and someone else. And allegedly that curse worked. They both ended up dead pretty quick. But anyway, a lot of people believe the Templars rose again and morphed into the Freemasons. So it's a very deep story. And, Raymond says specifically that Watt's shaken many hands, but the Freemasons are the ones that truly matter. If you look at politicians, I've seen Mike Pence actually do a really weird handshake before, and a lot of these politicians are Freemasons, as well as people in legal system, police and bands. It's just that we don't expect them in bands as much, although they're coming out more and more with these little, these, I should say, big, eyeball and the pyramid tattoos and things like this. They're not hiding anymore. They're coming out more out in the open. In the song Slaves and Bulldozers, Chris Cornell said, counting all the hands I shook, now I know why you've been shaking. I like the lyrics on that song a lot, because I think Cornell's talking about the industry, the music industry, but business dealings as well. And, everyone's trying to shake your hand. You're on the way up. But then time passes and you look back and you realize, oh, now I know why you've been shaking my hand, because, you want to use me. You're an asshole. Or, maybe he's making a reference to Freemasonry. Maybe, the secret handshakes. It could go both. I could see it going both ways. So in this last section, I want to talk about the hidden hand. And if we look at these pictures, you can see there's a history. The Jesuits are the military religious order of the Roman Catholic Church, Masonic and other oaths. And it talks about the hidden hand that lets the other initiates know that the individual depicted is part of this secret brotherhood, and that his actions were inspired by the Masonic philosophy and beliefs. Furthermore, the hand that executes the actions is hidden behind cloth, which can symbolically refer to covert nature of the Mason's actions. So it's not just about putting your hand in your pocket or hiding your hand. It's in this specific way, kind of like in the chest area here. You see Johnny Depp doing it here. There's thousands of examples. I'm not going to sit here and show you a bunch. I'm just going to show you a few that I grabbed on the internet. There's Obama doing it. And, more of these creepy pictures. This one from Duncan's Mosaic Ritual and Monitor by Malcolm C. Duncan from 1866. So I have this book called Spray Paint the Walls, which is a really good book about Black Flag. And I never even noticed this before until I really thought about it. But there are a total of 8 band pictures in that book. And out of 8, Greg Ginn is the only one doing this. He's doing it with 2 hands here. And I just find that very interesting. He does it in 2 out of the 8 pictures that are in the book. It makes me wonder if the author maybe knew that, he picked these pictures specifically for some reason. But I just found that a little creepy. And then you got Wino, who is in St. Vitus. St. Vitus was on SST Records in the 80s. And the singer Wino did another band, many years after that, in the early 2000s, I think it was, called The Hidden Hand. And you got the eyeball up here and you got the serpents. So, I'm a big fan of Wino. I don't know if he's involved in any whatever weird cult stuff, but this is certainly suggestive considering everything we've been talking about. We talk about the mystique and mystery of certain people, certain, figures that we idolize, like Prince, or even, a Greg Ginn, or Quorthon from Bathory, or even Blackie Lawless from Wasp. I suspect that some of these people, and, it's just a suspicion, I don't know if it's true or not, don't go hassling them because I said this, but I suspect that some of these people have a lot of secrets that they can't talk about that has a lot to do with how they got to where they are and what their position is in society. And because they can't talk about it, they either have to lie about it or they have to stay silent or they end up contradicting themselves. And I think this explains a lot of what we translate as mystique and eccentricity may have something to do with that. Now, there's a guy named William Snowbelli who has a very interesting story to tell that I highly recommend anyone interested in this stuff I'm talking about watch some of his old videos from like the 90s and early 2000s. He was a member of the Church of Satan. He was an Illuminist, heavily into the occult. And he said that when he was a quote-unquote vampire, which is, I guess, was a level in the Satanic Church, there came a point where his job, in order to graduate to the next level, the next degree, if you will, was to become a Mormon. And he talks about going to the Mormon headquarters in Salt Lake City and all this. And I mean, just think about it. You talk about wolf in sheep's clothing. And this is how they think. This is valuable information because it gets you in the mind of the most evil people, the Machiavellians out there. This is what it's about. It's about getting a job at the babysitting place so you can hurt children. You know what I mean? Getting a job at a place where people are handicapped so you can take advantage of them. People with no morals, this is the kind of stuff they do. They just go, I want to do this. I want to hurt this person. I want to mess that up. And what do I need to do? And because they lack morality, nothing's off the table. So stories that people like William Snowbelli have to say, people who've come out of it and are talking, these are valuable for understanding what a large segment of society just doesn't want to look at. Here's a little snapshot from that horrible John Wick film, which I unfortunately sat through one time. It was one of the worst movies I've seen in years. Keanu Reeves' acting just seems to get worse and worse. But anyhow, there was one aspect of the film that I found very fascinating, and it was this idea that all these homeless people and random people in the street are like these undercover, spies for, the bad guys or whatever, or maybe even the good guys. And it just got me thinking about all the homeless people. I mean, I don't want to buy into a stereotype that homeless people are all up to no good, but I think there's something to this. If you're thinking in terms of the Machiavellian mindset, why wouldn't you try it, to spy on people or who knows what? Drug rings, prostitution rings, you can get all kinds of stuff done under the radar because who wants to walk into a smelly, hobo hut, and that's exactly the reason why that's a good place to plot stuff, because nobody suspects it. And speaking of plots in unlikely places, there's this book, Burning Down the House, that I came across when I was researching the Bathory and the Scandinavian Metal Attack and all the Lords of Chaos stuff. And I was looking into the White Power stuff and trying to figure out what was up with all that. And this book, Burning Down the House, talks about the Stasi, which was one of the most extreme, surveillance units, kind of like the CIA, but in East Germany before the wall came down, when they were basically communist, and they were surveying the people like you wouldn't believe. I mean, they had people in every facet of society, including bands. Members of bands were actually informants with the Stasi to try and stop the movement of, ending the communism and bringing down the wall. And this book talks about how the punk movement was kind of directly involved in that. One of the Stasi's main tasks was spying on the population, primarily through a vast network of citizens turned informants, and fighting any opposition by overt and covert measures, including hidden psychological destruction of dissidents. Under its longtime head, Marcus Wolf, this directorate gained a reputation as one of the most effective intelligence agencies of the Cold War. The Stasi also maintained contacts and occasionally cooperated with Western terrorists. What's really confusing about all this and discouraging is that the more you look into this kind of stuff, the harder it gets to trust anything. To quote someone I, watched a podcast on, is anything real? Between the out and out conspirators and the unwitting participants, who do you trust? Who's actually real out there? I don't know. Sometimes it gets hard to tell, but we need to have these conversations. We need to have these thoughts. We need to give it some thought. And I know there's a fine line between, like a witch hunt and a real legitimate investigation, but there's also a lot of gray areas. And I don't think that we should back down or bow down to a culture that tries to persecute those that are pursuing these avenues of inquiry, and just sort of trying to loop us all into this stereotype of, quote unquote, conspiracy theorists, which really, when you break down the phrase literally, shouldn't really be a bad thing, because conspiracies are negative. Conspiracies are truths. They're things that really happen. So if you have a conspiracy theory, it really just means that you think there might be a conspiracy somewhere. To arrive at a situation where that's just across the board bad, no ifs, ands, or buts, is a very dangerous place to be in society, because it benefits conspirators. So any damage that someone tries to tell you that it does, like, oh, you're just stirring up stuff where there isn't anything, and let the victims mourn in peace, and don't stir up a bunch of crap, blah, blah, blah. I think that's a result of the propaganda that is trying to conceal, what the conspirators are really trying to do. So, this isn't intended to be necessarily conclusive. I just want to get people thinking along these lines, and hopefully we can start getting some more answers. Because I'm tired. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of seeing people die for mysterious reasons that, where the explanations don't make sense. I'm tired of being lied to by the media and being told things that I know aren't true. And I'm tired of musicians not saying anything and not speaking up when I know they know something, and maybe they're covering their asses. Maybe they really don't know. Maybe they just don't care. I don't know. But, to quote Rollins, I'm going to keep screaming in your ear till I find out, the answer, to sort of paraphrase.